Welcome to Agile Kata for Professional Coaching, ICF, the International Coaching Federation. I have prepared some content around a new use case for Agile Kata, and I will get to that in a little bit of some stepping stones. The audience for this webinar could be coming from various kind of places. So for example, because it says ICF in it, there might be some folks on this call that have a massive background, maybe even a certification in professional coaching from the ICF. And they're hearing or learning about Agile Kata the very first time. There could also be the other way around, and that might be the more dominant audience here because we have published this on Agile Kata Meetup and obviously in the newsletter and through Agile Kata Pro. So we'll probably see more people coming from a background of Agile Kata who are interested, hopefully interested in learning of how this could be applied to professional coaching. And maybe that is the beginning, a journey for starting something new, entering that kind of world. So those two worlds are coming together, and I want to just spend a little bit of time of navigating you through this, why this is the case and why am I so excited about this. First and foremost, we have this book, which I authored, Agile Kata, that came out just around, it's a 2025 copyright, but it came out just at the end of 2024. And it is a collection of 3 parts, basically. The 3 parts are, first part is an introduction to Kata, what is Kata thinking, scientific thinking, experimentation, and so forth. The second part is really how it relates to agility and how it can improve agility. And we can also say adaptability, because that becomes very important in the context of what we are talking about here today. Then in the third one, the third part of the book is a collection of 5 use cases. And those 5 use cases are the ones on the right. Now, before we go there, a little bit of background of how this all evolved. Just before COVID, 2017, 18, 19, I was, through my consulting and training work, I was in desperate need of a way of looking for a process for agile transformation. So agile transformation was a hot topic at that point. And I got approached by various people that asked me, what is the process of transforming to agility? And at that point, I didn't really have good answers for this kind of question, right? There were some things out there. Many of those things were just experiences or what we have done before or what we have seen others do, maybe even competitors and so forth. So as a result of that, I was trying to figure out what it is they do. And to my surprise, I actually found out that these processes that were being applied were actually waterfall. So yes, the irony here is that waterfall processes were used to introduce Agile at that time. So I thought there's got to be a better way introducing agility and into an organization. And it took me time. I navigated the lean space and I stumbled across Mike Rother's work on Toyota Kata. That is more on the production, manufacturing side, and of course, a link to Toyota, as many of you probably know. But what I found in Kata, in the improvement Kata, was a way of navigating complexity, the unknown, and how to work in shorter intervals. So not to necessarily work in an agile framework, but using this as a thinking process of working through complexity and the unknown. And that is really what struck me at that point as maybe there's more to it. So I kept deploying within my practice that kind of Kata thinking. And the result was really something you see here in this book is the Agile Kata. That would be the third bullet point you see here on the right. That's really for the transformation. So that was my main intent at that time, just to look for something that is applicable to transformations, agile transformations, and so forth. And we're going to get to that a little bit more because I didn't write the word agile transformation in front of it purposely. What we then found out by applying this Kata, in this case, the Agile Kata, to our work with our clients, we realized that this is actually not something that is only useful for agile transformation. So it comes handy in many other ways. For example, a team having Scrum, every 2 weeks, they have a retrospective. And what we have noticed was that teams just didn't follow through with their improvement ideas. And the reason was because they were already going into another sprint, or they were distracted by other improvement ideas, or maybe too many, and they were not focused. So we realized that Agile Kata could be a complementary kind of activity in parallel to an agile process to improve the underlying process. It's really cool stuff. We also noticed that you could use it instead of Scrum or Kanban. It's actually a thinking process. So why not applying that kind of thinking process of navigating through product development? Super lightweight. And we found that out too. We also noticed that on an organizational level, it can take hurdles out and increase business agility. And last but not least, for at least in terms of the book, we also noticed that it could be an excellent way of navigating product management. And here, Melissa Perry, for example, who has published in this space, also is super hip on Kata and also endorsed my book, Agile Kata, over there. So those are the 5 use cases. At that point, we thought that's enough for the book so that the reader has this idea of how universal Agile Kata can be. We outlined those 5. They're very unique, different kind of ways of improving something towards more agility. And those are the 5 you see here. And then we stopped and we published the book. But we knew that the journey would continue, that there would be other use cases popping up. And we're already learning from people that are using Agile Kata that they are super excited in the context of they're maybe getting inspired by one of those 5 use cases, but applying it then again in their unique case. So if we are extracting one of those and say, oh, that is really unique, maybe we do publish them as a separate use case and create awareness within the community, and like maybe something you haven't thought of applying the Agile Kata as well. And this is where we are today, because this is a use case that is in addition to those 5, how to use Agile Kata in the context of coaching conversations. This is not a training in Agile Kata. There are trainings you can find on Agile Kata. These are one-day trainings, and you can sign up with any of the certified trainers. One of them is me, around the world at agilekata.pro. That is the website where you want to go for training and learning more about Agile Kata. This use case is complimentary and it's something you can just download, and I will, after this webinar, share the resources with you, including audio content and this video from this presentation. So we're going to bundle this all together into something that is useful. Yeah. Thank you for the hands down there on the right. Thank you so much. All right. So if you're coming from an audience of ICF, let's say, from a coaching world, and you're like, what is this Kata? How can this help me in my coaching conversation? But I want to learn a little bit more about what it is. Or maybe you're new to both Kata and coaching. You're like, what is this webinar all about? At agilekata.pro, you'll find some shorts. We have some very short videos there for you where we explain the differences here. For example, pattern versus framework. What is and why scientific thinking, and how can it help me? And why is it called Kata? All of those kind of questions are addressed at agilekata.pro. I would say after this webinar, navigate over there, take a look, poke around, see what interests you. And if you have questions, always reach out. If you are somebody who is familiar with Agile Kata and you're like, what is this ICF and coaching conversations? There are different kind of ways of how to get started. Here's one that was recently released also at agilekata.pro/microlearning courses. You see the link at the bottom, where you can actually take a micro-credential with ICH about coaching conversations, and an entirely self-paced training where you can just sign up, follow, go through the video content, and by the end of this course, you will receive this micro-credential and coaching conversation. That's a very basic overview of professional coaching and what the nature is. And if you like that, maybe you want to take a more serious step into professional coaching, and that would be the gateway to the ICF. So in terms of our definition of Agile Kata, is really the definition, right? So we looked at Agile Kata as a universal pattern for learning and continuous improvement. That is really a derivative of our initial statement of that the Agile Kata is a universal pattern for learning and continuous agile improvement. So the motivation is here that there is Kata, these routines, these deliberate practice of new habits you would be doing. And they're gonna, through this repetition of these kind of Kata, comes from martial arts, you will reinforce new behavior and replace old habits with new habits over time. Now, in the context of Agile Kata, it is very specific to improving towards more agility, right? So this is not very generic on improving anything. This is always something with agility in mind. So I do need to point that out here before we take a deeper dive. Again, if you have any kind of questions, we will not address them right away, but we can collect them. If you want to go in the bottom of your Zoom window and just click on Q&A. If you have any questions, just fire away. I will take a look at it at the end. But again, we have already some questions through the registration form coming in. So we have something there, but we're going to explore that at the very end. Awesome. Okay. So it is key here to understand that it's a universal belief that this is just the beginning of understanding of how this can be helpful in any kind of improvement. And even though there is a focus on agility, the other key word that stands out here is it's a pattern. It's not a framework. It's not a process. It's not a methodology. So it's just a pattern, and a pattern is it's a proven solution for a common problem. So when we're looking at patterns, they can help us and serve us in various kind of ways. And every time you're about learning or continuous improvement, and you want to achieve more agility, more adaptability, more flexibility, this might be a good option to look at first. That is a good definition. And there's definitely learning in it. So learning and continuous improvement somehow also applies to the coachee kind of relationship. And that's where we want to go. So here's kind of on the highest level possible. Here are the 4 steps of the improvement kata that was identified by Mike Rother in Toyota. And basically what it says in this kind of description, it looks like a sequence, but we'll get to that in a bit. I think that makes sense to look at it first this way, but I'm going to show you a different kind of visual representation in a moment. So in the first step of navigating through this, it would be, and this is, again, this is for any kind of improvement, transformation, business agility, product development, all of those things, including the coaching conversation. So this is not specific to ICF here. This is on the highest level what we share. So in the first step, somebody would be looking and trying to understand the challenge, the direction we want to take. So this is the goal. This is the mountaintop far away. And there's some clouds in between, which we don't know what is in between, a lot of uncertainty. In our second step, if we have that, identify this direction and challenge, I'm going to give you an example here in a sec. We would be stepping back in time to our present, right? So first we're going to look all the way forward into the future, far away, and say, what is it we want to solve? What is the challenge we have? What is the direction we want to take? Then we're going to come back to the present and say, where are we right now? So we're trying to understand what is the current condition. Here the word is condition, right? It's a state we're in. It's not a plan. This is not a description or anything. It's the condition we, as an organization or as a person, are currently in. So we're looking at data here, right? We're looking at evidence. We're looking at things that we feel like that defines the current state we're in. And then only if we know what the current state is, and we know what the challenge and the direction is, then we know how big is this delta, and it's probably big, right? So that is another challenge in our work is we want to break things down. Nothing really too new for somebody who's coming out of the Agile camp. But what we would be doing here, we would be describing not the plan or the path we're going to take forward. We're actually just saying what is a small step we can take to achieve a different kind of condition. And we call that the next target condition. The next target condition is that step. And as you can see in this image behind that statement is that there is now another flag, was a stepping stone towards that mountain with that challenge, that direction we wanted to take. We're still there. We're still keeping an eye on it. We're still navigating towards that, but we're now identifying a path. And there is this first flag we're going to take. Now we have the direction, we have the current condition, and we have those two, the current condition and the target condition. And with those two conditions now, which are more narrow, we can now say, all right, what kind of experiment could we take toward that target condition? And maybe there are more than one. Maybe there are multiple target experiments we can take to achieve that. And that's what you indicate here or see on this image with 3 blue arrows over here. And those indicate just there's multiple paths to get to that stepping stone, that smaller mountaintop in between. So that's the visual representation. And this is where the sequence somehow stops us here, because we would put this into an iterative approach. And we would say, okay, now with reaching the target condition, we have a new current condition, we need a new target condition. These are the two kind of conditions we could be in. Very clearly defined in terms of the conditions, not the path, not the planning. So we do not describe the plan in between. We want to replace that plan through a series of experiments. All right, so this is on the highest level possible here. I'm going to give you now another definition, and that comes out of the coaching world, out of the ICF. And the ICF defines a coaching conversation as a thought-provoking and creative process that helps clients maximize their personal and professional potential. And with that definition in mind, we can now say, that is interesting. So we're seeing a creative process. So maybe it's unknown, maybe it's a little nebulous, right? We want to maximize their personal and professional potential. So we really don't know all these things up front, what we're trying to navigate to. And we want to maximize that outcome. So we have this kind of dialogue now with a coachee, or as the ICF would call it, a client, to have that kind of conversation to explore that. And there are many models out there in ICF. One of them you might be familiar with, is a very popular one, is GROW. And GROW is just one particular framework of how you can navigate through this coaching conversation. It's also the coaching arc and so forth. And with all that in mind, I realized going through coaching conversations and being a certified executive coach myself, I realized, these frameworks, what they have in mind is something very similar to what we see in the Agile world, with processes like Scrum, etc. And what Agile Kata can do is provides an alternative to that, and actually says, hey, why don't we look at what we just saw in those 4 steps and apply that to a coaching conversation? We could say, what is the direction a coachee would like to take? And we know this could be an unknown process, and we don't know how long this is going to take, but we can take an assessment on saying, what is your current condition? Where are you right now? What are the challenges you're facing forward, right? And where are you right now and what's causing that? And then we could have exactly that same dialogue of saying, hey, what is your target condition? What is a small step we can take? And what are your experiments? I will get to that. All right. So this is an interesting kind of similarity we notice in how to approach a product development process using an Agile process versus how to approach a coaching conversation. Here's the coaching arc. Many are familiar with, and actually something that would be covered in the self-paced training I mentioned before. That's where we're navigating through this, because it's so common for professional coaches. But there is bonus material in that course that now replaces that with the coaching conversation using Agile Kata. Here's a different kind of visual representation I personally like better than the 4 steps before. It brings it in a different kind of context. Here's in one full picture. It's the same images, but it puts it together. So it doesn't look like it's a sequential process, because that is the danger that somebody might say is 1, 2, 3, 4, done. It's not, right? So it's a challenge that might change over time as well, but that is probably the most solid one, because I have a challenge statement. And then we navigate through this, but you can see here that there's more iterative nature here represented in this image. So this is my preference over there. So let's look at this a little bit from a professional coaching and how the world to Agile Kata would meet, right? So we see on the professional coaching side, we're trusted partners. There's confidentiality, there's growth, client growth, we're discovering along the way. So these are the characteristics of professional coaching. And really by ICF, right? It's important for me to point this out. So this is not like the definition of agile coaching or team coaching, although we'll get to that. It's really the one-on-one conversation where we have a coach and a client, or sometimes called coachee, and that kind of definition of ICF. And it's all about professional coaching, right? So it could be applied for anything other than improving agility. It is really putting a mirror back to the coachee, right? Through powerful questions, through investigative kind of conversation of where that journey is going to go. And most importantly, for professional coaching, it has to be a flexible structure. It cannot be static, because you never know where that coaching conversation is going to go. These are 2 humans talking, exploring something, and you just don't know up front, per session, but also across sessions, of how that could change and what kind of things you would need to incorporate. Frameworks in that particular case might not suit you very well. And on the right side, you see the Agile Kata approach, something we just talked about. Okay. So what we see here in this use case, what we identified is actually 3 scenarios, right? So out of the one Agile Kata meets ICF, we see actually 3 scenarios of how you could, and maybe there are more. And if there are, please let me know if you are applying this in the context of a professional coaching. The first one is really the bread and butter ICF one-on-one coaching, one coach, one coachee, and where these professional coaching conversations taking place. The second scenario in this use case could be team coaching. That is more like a need for agile coaches, working with scrum masters, working with teams, and how to apply that kind of style into your coaching practice, working with teams. And then last but not least, also for the coach itself, the individual. So you see here, how do I use this kata thinking specifically for myself, right? Not necessarily with my coachee or with the team. So those three we want to explore a little bit. I'm going to start with the first one here. So we could say, here's a coaching conversation. So this is longer term coaching, is the understanding the direction of the challenge. When I coach, when I work with clients, the first thing is really a discovery call. And during the discovery call, before this all starts, we'll find out, do we like each other as coach and coachee? Is this something that clicks from a personal perspective? Can we work together? Is this a healthy kind of start? And that it goes, obviously, that the coachee can check out, is this really something I want to navigate through with that particular coach? That is ICF. The coachee could walk away from coaching at any given point. So yeah, so that kind of discovery call would take place first. And during that, the direction, the challenge is very often already explored. So there is a definition of that, and that can guide and structure the coaching conversation. So here, as an example, would be somebody expressing like, I want to lead with more confidence. I want to have less self-doubt as a thing. So this is very personal. This is one-on-one kind of coaching, right? It's a confidential kind of conversation. But that is the first step we would need to define. So the coachee, the client, would need to bring the challenge to the coaching conversation so that it can take place, if that makes sense. All right. As a second step here, just to stick to that kind of example, we would say, okay, where are you right now? And this would be now coaching conversation number one, right? So you would be already now in coaching. We would say, okay, after the discovery call, the direction that the challenge is identified, it's not a requirement to go in. It helps though. It helps setting the stage a little bit. We could just go in and define the direction and challenge in our first coaching conversation. But in this particular case, we could say, all right, let's go in. Current condition, where are you? I just recently spoke in a meeting, but I'm still nervous about this, still having self-doubts. I want to have more confidence, but I am nervous about it. And maybe there's a way of measuring this and putting this into numbers or feelings and describing that a little bit more in detail. And then in our third step, we would create through the target condition, we would ask our coachee what the focus is and what would be a step they can take. And they would possibly, and this is just an example here, I'll share this with you, see what is the hesitation all about? Why am I in that particular state, right? What is my identity within the organization? And I want to explore that a little bit more. Again, always under the umbrella of going towards my longer term goal. And now, here comes the experiment step, right? So we could say, what are the things then coachee could be doing? And maybe as part of that conversation, our coach, our client, coachee or client would say, I want to journal this a little bit. And I want to see what are those moments when I am unsure and I want to describe them. Or maybe I do an audio journal, maybe I write the journal, whatever the outcome is of trying to move forward with this. Now, the interesting thing for everybody who's very familiar with coaching conversations is when we started using Grow, or the coaching arm was always options, or it was what are the steps you would be taking. And what has really served us well in Kata is really the definition of an experiment, because an experiment feels like, it might work, it might not work. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to work. And the experiment, we felt like that the client is having an easier time of identifying those because we might be thinking a little bit more outside the box as a result of that. All right. So this is just an example for a one-on-one conversation here. Okay. Now, what you see here is our second scenario. That is in the context of Agile Kata and team coaching. And here are the things we notice in team coaching. There is a different kind of work that's going on. And one of them is facilitation. When you work with teams, right, there could be conflict, there could be just decision-making. How do we work as a team? And that's where our Agile Kata could also come in very nice and can be combined with, for example, liberating structures or any other facilitation technique that brings these people in the team really together to identify and hear everybody's voice, right? So then not only one person is talking, because it should be team facilitation, not individual facilitate one particular person. The Agile Kata, just like very similar to process improvement on Scrum teams or Kanban teams, etc., could also be used to visualize and make things very transparent. That will go a little bit too deep here at this particular point, but we're using storyboards there in Agile Kata and very visible of what the challenges are, where we are right now, what is our next step, and what the experiments are. And we could also use that in the context of coaching, right? What is the current approach? What are we trying? What is the goal we're trying to do in our organization? So this is really cool. Now, the third element of working in teams is the leadership portion. And what we have noticed is when we're taking a more coaching style in leadership, that we're actually creating very beneficial to agile ways of working, autonomous teams that self-organize, that self-manage. So by being going ahead of a coach as a leader and navigating with a team, right, is like really a shift from what you see here on the bottom of the slide, a shift from directing to enabling learning. So the coaching approach can really help employees or team members to really embrace this experimentation style and think about their current condition, next target condition, and really apply more like a scientific thinking approach into their work. But the key difference is that we're not telling the teams what to do. We are asking questions to find out what their thought process is at a given point in time. So this is an interesting shift for leaders to take in their work. So we're modeling our behavior as a leader of what kind of culture we would like to see within the team. And we're like role models, if you want to see it this way. All right. So those are the things the Agile Kata can help you address when you are working more, applying this from a coaching perspective in the context of teams. Now, what we have seen is from an experience perspective, right, when you do apply that, is it creates tremendous amount of focus. It is a way of calling it scientific thinking. You might want to reshape that word a little bit. Not every organization likes the word scientific thinking. I want to be honest with you. Some think it sounds theoretical, even though it's the opposite is the case. It's extremely practical because it is deliberate practice. It's something we learn in school, in project-based learning. It's always about applying something, see the outcome, and then learn from it. So it's extremely practical. But if your organization doesn't like, or people around you are not familiar with the term scientific thinking, you might want to just use the word kata for this, explain that, or just use continuous improvement instead. But it's really about the deliberate practice of these kind of things. The Agile Kata comes automatically with feedback loops. It comes with a test, fail, and learn approach. All things we talk about in product management, in transformations, in teamwork, and so forth. So this is really natural if you're navigating through this. As a side comment, I wouldn't even explain kata in the beginning to your team or to your individual. I wouldn't even explain kata to your coachee or your client. I would just ask questions that answer those 4 steps in one way or the other, right? So it's not a teaching moment. It's about you asking the right questions to get the answers to those points and navigate your client or your team or your organization through that process behind the scenes. Now, if somebody says, this is working very well, tell me more about it. And then it's like, all right, now I'm going to tell you about what kata is and what scientific thinking is and continuous improvement and so on. Now you have an audience, but I wouldn't necessarily go in like that. What it establishes is a lifelong learning process, and that is something really interesting for if your background is, let's say, agile transformations. It's a common misunderstanding in agile transformations is that somebody thinks it's over, that a transformation has been completed, and this is really the difference, right? So it's not a process of completing something. It is about establishing a routine in the background that makes you improve beyond where you want to go. And that is continuous improvement, right? So it's not the process of accomplishing something. It's about establishing the habits, the routines, and the thought process behind it to accomplish any kind of transformation. And I cannot only tell you how many organizations right now do talk about AI, and they're talking about AI transformation. And for me, that is just another way of approaching a transformation. And I would look at Agile Kata to accomplish that. That's just a little side comment here. So it's a generic kind of transformation, either as a person, as an organization, and so forth. So you put the challenge into place and the kata can navigate you to that challenge over time. All right, so here's just a quick example where you would see define a personal development challenge. This is now the individual scenario for this use case, right? So we have covered the one-on-one coaching conversation. We've seen the team conversation. Now we're on the third one. How do we use this tool? How do we use this tool to improve ourselves as a coach, right? So this is also an interesting reflection point for yourself. So for example, how do we define a personal development challenge, become more effective in active listening? So it's actually an example for myself in the beginning. When you look at yourself as a coach, what are your improvement ideas? Maybe you're going through a school, maybe you're going through a certification program or whatever you're doing, and you're noticing maybe your active listening could be improved. So for example, we could use that kata now for ourselves in a journal, in a book, or on a board, or electronically to navigate through this. And I could say, all right, I'm going to use feedback from clients, self-observation, journaling. Maybe I can even record a conversation. Maybe my client gives me permission to record this conversation. And then I can replay that and say, okay, what are the active listening moments I have missed? How can I catch those better going forward? Like those are the things you might be using for establishing a current condition. And then you can say, all right, what is a small step I can do? And here is a target condition. You say, oh, I want to be able to hold silence for at least 10 seconds after a powerful question without interrupting. Trying to achieve this within 2 weeks. Put a timeline to that. Remember, kata has nothing to do with sprints or iterations, but you can define, if you want, like a calendar entry where you would say, I want to check back on that in 2 weeks and see how am I doing. And then we could run some small coaching experiments. And I can say, I'm going to apply that 10-second powerful questions break during a retrospective, a daily, or some reviews. In this case, if you are, let's say, in a Scrum environment. So it's just like a way for you to navigate your own personal change. And here's something I do need to point out here at the end. It's really, that is super cool what Mike Rother in Toyota Kata really identified. And that is really the self-improvement through a second coach. Yeah, you're right. There's a second coach. And that's really the continuous growth. And that is something to really look into, to have somebody, an additional coach, a second coach, it's what it's called, that is actually observing your coaching conversation, obviously always with the permission of your client. So you would be conducting your coaching conversation and your second coach would give you after the coaching conversation, not during, but after feedback. Now, this is interesting because the second coach, what we often hear from clients is, oh, that's the experienced kata coach, right? That is the experience. It's the senior person. That's not necessarily the case. It could be swapped in the next conversation. So for example, I could be having a second coach on my side during my coaching conversation, but I become the second coach for a different coach or even for the other coach that has been my second coach. So this model we could go back and forth in this and improve our own. And again, just for the example we just saw, active listening, there might be things we're picking up. The second coach is picking up just by purely listening and pointing out the improvement ideas. It's a wonderful idea. I love it. And I would even if you're not embracing this necessarily in your daily work yet, even if you're, let's say, a Scrum Master or Agile coach, I would definitely look into that particular piece. This could be applied to any kind of closing a feedback loop for you. Really cool. All right. So this is really what I had in the making. We had these 3 scenarios. There are different kind of ways of how you can connect with the Agile community in various ways. There's the LinkedIn. We have the group where we sometimes share some news on LinkedIn or repost something from the folks using it. There's obviously the Agile Kata Pro program where we're really focusing on establishing and talking about Agile Kata and using it. And there is a little assessment at the end where you can test your knowledge against Agile Kata. And then on the right side, you see a meetup where we also have something where we announce these kind of things as well. And we have partnerships with the Agile Alliance, which always promotes our work, which is great. These are the different kind of ways of how you can engage. Now, we love, even if you're not in part of any of these communities, but you would need to probably go to agilecata.pro or send me an email, which you will get after this recording. I'm going to share a little email with you with as I said, I bundle the information for you. And I would love to hear what you guys are doing with Agile Kata and where you see a good use in your daily work, or maybe for an initiative you want to work on that's also very common, that somebody has a bigger topic and would like to do something with it for a few months and wants to use Agile Kata to help them navigate through this.